We did a bunch of stuff on Sunday, and we have a lot for you in this podcast. So I always feel like it's a lot more interesting to listen to people that do this for a living. So I reached out to a bunch of coaches and a bunch of people in the front offices, and I got 6 perspectives on the NBA Finals, and I give you a couple quick thoughts of my own and my pick at the very end. Okay, so anonymous quote number 1, his thoughts on the NBA Finals. Quote, my brain says Celtics are better, but I can't pick against the best player in the world right now. I know Celtics are far more experienced playing, but Joe Mazzulla scares me if things get close. This is the old schoolness in me, but I feel like if the C's miss a bunch of threes, their only counter is Tatum ISO. I think Brown is going to struggle, not because he isn't good enough, but because he's going to have to take on Luka. Genuine question to come out of this are, if Dallas wins, are people going to try and get their new age Tyson Chandler of the world? I.e., does this make Sarr almost a lock to go number 1? I was watching a little Sarr last night. That dude can move. That was my quote. He continues, or if Boston wins, do people once again double down on wings equaling wins? I think both teams being here reinforces that teams need to build with skill in mind first, then get as much size and skill with each position. But size is apparent with all role player spots. Okay, I like that. Pretty good perspective. Let's do another one here. Quote, the finals are such a unique series because at this point in the season, nothing is a secret. It comes down to which team is comfortable enough in themselves to know which parts of their identity to stick with and which parts need to be changed as the series unfolds. So then I asked, who's more comfortable in your opinion? The quote continues, Boston. They've been in this spot and know what it takes. They've felt the emotional sting of tough moments on the biggest stage. Their ability to deal with adversity is going to be a strength. So a pick for Boston. All right, let's continue as I scroll through my contacts. Quote, I see the Celtics winning it in 5, especially if Porzingis is healthy enough to give them 15 to 20 minutes of quality basketball. Boston has 4 players they can throw at Luka and Kyrie, which no team up to this point has been able to do that. Dallas's bench is deeper than Boston, but neither has gone deep into their benches in the postseason. Dallas is probably thrown, whether it's a Josh Green or a Hardy moment, the Exum Hardaway thing hasn't really mattered, but then you have the double big deal where it's a platoon with Gafford and Lively. But I think that's actually going to be really interesting to see if Boston goes with an actual double big non-platoon, but Horford and Porzingis, which they played for a long stretch there in the second game against Dallas back on March 1st, which I went back and watched. And you watch that game and you're like, okay, I feel really good about Boston, but I think it's irrelevant. And from that point on, basically, Dallas turned into one of the best teams in the NBA, especially on the defensive side. All right. Another piece of perspective. All right. Quote, I think since the deadline, Dallas has been playing the best basketball in the league, so this run for them isn't a total surprise, although I do think the matchups worked out nicely. Boston is just a superior team, in my opinion, though, so I think they'll handle it in 5 or 6. Porzingis' ability to drag Gafford Lively away from the rim is pretty key. They basically hunt down a mismatch and attack, so Dallas can't really hide anyone or try to funnel guys to their backline guys because they won't be there since they're dealing with Porzingis. If the series were a little closer in terms of team quality level, I'd lean towards just who had the best player, which would be Dallas, obviously, but I don't think it's all that close team-wise. That was one of the more aggressive ones. I would say of the people that I've talked to, and I'm not using every single quote and all the conversations that I've had over the last few days, the analytic model for Boston 2 years ago was so overwhelming. And it wasn't like, hey, a pick for Boston against Golden State, the bad pick. It just was shocking how many of the models just had weighted it so heavily in Boston's favor. And I think there's still some of that with Boston. But look, we have difference of opinions all over the place. All right, let's get another one here. I got 2 more. For me, it's Luka and Tatum trying to get out from the shadow they've been under as elite young stars, but haven't won the big one. Brown and Kyrie are clear X factors of the 2s in this series that could dictate the series entirely, while Porzingis could also ultimately change the series too if he's back to form. I would love to see Drew get his second with 2 different franchises while being traded from Milwaukee when everyone knew that immediately made Boston that much better. Such an underrated player in his career has a chance to show just how valuable he's always been in his role. And finally, quote, this series will come down to the centers. The Celtics' ability to mix matchups and coverages with Luke and Kyrie. Who do they put Porzingis on and Horford on? And how will they guard pick and roll when involved in the action? If they're relying on just switching everything to stall out the Dallas offense, they are in trouble. And if they're going to play in a drop, they will equally be in trouble. Both can be effective, but in mixed doses at opportune times. The Mavericks bigs will be tasked with a very different task. They will be tasked to guard stretch bigs, aka 5 shooters. They guarded very few 5-out shooter lineups in the Clippers series. When Chet was in with OKC, the centers were able to, quote, guard, meaning not guard, Giddey. And in the mini series, they had Gobert, Anderson on the floor for majority of minutes. In this series, how disciplined will they be guarding Porzingis and Horford in the strong side corner, in the weak side slot, top of the floor? If they can't do so, Dallas at least has the option to go Kleba, Washington at the 5. What option does Boston have if their bigs can't guard Luka, Kai, pick and rolls? So there is an overwhelming amount of just, hey, even if you like Dallas, it's going to look different, which was entirely my point on Sunday because of Porzingis. Porzingis has not mattered at all. And as you were projecting it out and how he's going to look, and I still think it's a lot to ask of just, hey, you've been out for a month plus. Now go out there and run around in the NBA Finals and contest at the rim, close out to the corner, know what the right movement is against Luka shit and the Kyrie stuff flying off of the ball. So series consistently remind us how different teams can look in 48 hours. And I wonder if Dallas in that game 1 is going to look horrifying because Porzingis doesn't even have anything close to his sea legs. And yet it could be an incredibly misleading part of the story that's told games 2 through the rest of them. I like the Celtics in 7. It's not me not really knowing. It's me being around for a really long time. And there are just very few times where I'm definitively like, in this series, this team has no chance. So I think some of the more analytically driven people think Boston's an overwhelming favorite. I think the coaches that I've talked to kind of love the Luka part of this more than anything else because he's the best player. I've heard that consistently. Is it just bullshit with guys? There's a couple numbers that are really interesting where the Pacers hit an absurd number of mid-range jumpers in that series where you're like, wait, Boston can't slow down the Pacers. The Pacers are probably a little bit better than people realize, but without Halliburton, nobody wants to hear it, although that makes it better defensively. And again, I'm not comparing the Pacers to the Mavericks, but there was stuff that happened in that series where you're like, why are they struggling? And then they kind of did a Dallas closing number on the Pacers that Dallas has been doing to everybody else, specifically Minnesota, where that talent gap just shows itself really quickly in those last 2 minutes. But then there's some other numbers where you look at some of the corner threes made against Boston during this run, and it's like at 25%. You're like, well, that's not going to happen against Dallas. You wouldn't expect it to, because if it isn't PJ, then it's been Jones. Like, guys have found ways, and it feels like even Josh Green's thrown in a couple, Hardy's thrown in a couple. So that number would probably go up. But the overwhelming thought is, what is Porzingis going to look like? Because if he's anything close, it's just going to be a different series than what Dallas has had in the past. And that's why I'm going with Boston at 7.